I'm deputy director at this foundation. It's a particular privilege for me to be here because I have to confess, this is, I knew there's a big and wide alumni network in Ukraine. I never realized it's 700, but it's probably the first time I meet you as a group, though I've met some people before, including some of those who are here. So I know you've worked with the IRF before. So when I was going to this meeting, I thought I would tell you more about what IRF does, and then we could think together what you are interested in and what of the things that we do resonate with you, are in the spheres where you work, something which you could see for yourself as an opportunity. And then we'll discuss how we move forward. Again, so happy to be here, and thank you so much for this invitation and the opportunity to talk to you. So very briefly, very quickly about the International Renaissance Foundation. So the mission is the same. It's fostering open, participatory, pluralistic society based on open society values and democratic processes. In Ukraine, we are a national foundation of OSF.
Can you use the mic? We're streaming you online. And
that's streaming. Okay. Like the whole network of the Open Society Foundations, we also were established by George Soros. He's about us. We've been around for 28 years. We're probably the oldest Ukrainian foundation of this kind. We started in 1990 with the name of Renaissance, which tells a lot about why we emerged and what we do here. It was about the renaissance of culture, of academic freedom, of liberal thinking, of the society which needed a voice, needed a possibility to connect internationally with intellectuals and freedom-loving people everywhere, and we were here to support that. 18,500 projects, and going and growing and counting. Every year, it's about 450, 460 projects. These are the figures for the last year. We still have not completed this year, so I will probably tell you more about this year. But basically, I think it's quite impressive. The figure is unfortunately not in dollars, and fortunately it's in Ukrainian hryvnias. It's 237 million. That's what we invested last year in projects that we've supported across the country. And this figure, 55,000, actually counts you as well, and probably your partners and also organizations that you probably know. We came to this figure when we brought together all our records for the 25 years of operation, when we were celebrating the anniversary in 2016, and then we stopped counting. So there's probably more. These are organizations, these are individuals, these are fellows. Whoever of you could think about early 90s when the foundation started operation, you probably could think about Soros professors, Soros scholars, Soros teachers, Soros students. There's a huge cohort of people who somehow are connected with the Open Society Foundations, and that makes me extremely proud and happy to say that we can maintain contacts with quite a lot of them. And with those who do not contact directly now, I hope we will be able to expand that. And I actually would like to ask you to join the active part of this wonderful cohort so that we could help this community to grow. That's what we do. Support the vibrant, diverse, and resilient civil society. Like this was resilient. It means that it survives, it gets strengthened, it looks for local sources of support, it inspires others, it connects across different sectors. It does lots of things the government is either unable or unwilling to do, or it's just enthusiastic about having more people on board. And there's one thing which I would like to specifically mention here. It's a community of people who have a positive agenda for this country. We are really optimistic about its prospects, and we want to contribute to having this positive and shared agenda and for helping move it forward. We create an enabling environment for change. Behind these words, we keep the contribution to development of legislation, which helps civil society organizations to operate. Its contribution to the reform process, which also helps more participation, which helps things happening and moving forward. Among those is the education sector reform, the public health sector reforms, the judiciary sector reform, and access to justice, and many more. But beyond that, we want to work not just with the civil society organizations, but here we put it as building public demand for the things that open society foundations stand for, which is equity, justice, transparency, accountability, rights, respect for individual freedom, and respect for every voice to be heard. And we promote broad inclusion as a value and a public good. I'll talk more about that. And last but not least, I'm glad you mentioned here the very urgent and very important need, which is addressing the challenges faced by people who had to be displaced from their homes. We also work on that. So, if you summarize all things that we do in 2 words, rather 2 pillars, around which all our strategy and activity rotates, this is reforms, but reforms mean nothing unless they connect with rights and help these rights to be protected, respected, implemented, and enjoyed by people. A few words about our programs. We have 6 at the moment, quite diverse. Here are like strategic priorities, but I will try to give you an example from each bit to just illustrate what it means. So that's the democratic practice, transparency and accountability in the public sector. Whoever heard about Prozoro system of public procurement? We supported the first exploration by civil society organizations, which then fed into the bigger process, which eventually developed into a transparent and really, really great Prozoro system. And we are still working on it with the model which is called Dozoro, which helps monitor if Prozoro is actually working well. If beyond Prozoro, the transparency, it also means that the public money is spent wisely and goes to where it's mostly needed and the impact could be highest. Local self-governance and decentralization reforms, a lot to be said about that. There are many donors working on local self-governance, and we are so happy that OSF and IRF in Ukraine, really just one of the donors working on this. Our part here is to make sure that the legislation which exists can actually be used by the communities. The communities have the capacity, have the resources, have the connections to be able to make democracy work. Call them democratic tools of participation. Inclusive education reform, we work very closely with the Ministry of Education on implementing the inclusive education as part of the mainstream education process. And I think that's one of the reforms which is really going on fast. And what we feel is extremely important for advancing the civil society values is really seeing inclusion as a value, having it as a right, not as a privilege for which people have to fight. We just want people to be accepting inclusion as a fact of life and as something which really enriches the communities. Quality of education, we're working with an institution called Nazavo, whoever knows that, and also others working. Yes, trying to help bring in the quality assessment system, which would be working, and also the system of accreditation of university courses, which would be transparent. And we also hope all these efforts will actually resonate somehow with what you do, and I would love to hear what you think about those. That's one of the areas where we could have a lot of communication and exchange. The last one here, but not least by all means, the better teacher training. If we hope and believe that education is absolutely essential for Ukraine to have a strong, resilient, democratic, responsible society. That all starts at the classroom. So that's why we think there's a huge contribution that civil society organizations and you as people who share with us the open society values could do when we make some inputs into a teacher's training curriculum. It's about civic education, but it's basically more than just civic education. Human rights and justice, that's another program. Criminal justice reform and procedural guarantees for human rights. Just to give you an example, there are some things or some places where relatively few people ever set a foot to, but they exist. I'm talking about the pre-trial detention facilities, and that's where people really are at risk of to their rights. The system which we are trying to pilot in just 3 of pre-trial detention facilities in different places of Ukraine is to introduce the custody record system, which is basically the facility is made responsible for making sure that nothing wrong happens to a person who ends up. It's not in prison. No crime has been committed. It's the person who is detained. Preventing impunity for grave crimes. This is the monitoring and documenting all the awful things happening to people as a result of the war in the Donbass and the occupation of the Crimea. Better access to legal aid. This is one of our flagship projects, which was started many years ago. And after being for 5 or 6 years, as a smaller pilot in 3 regions, Kharkiv being one of them, Bila Tserkva near Kiev another one, and there was one in Khmelnytsky. The system of unpaid legal aid became owned by the state. It's now a state-provided service, as you know. We stay connected to make sure that access to legal aid is accessible or available for all people, including those who live in small towns and villages where the ministry, for some reason, may not be able to have the reach. So that's where we help provide the primary legal aid and connect the people with those in the government who provide legal aid and promote the right to life and physical integrity. It's very much connected with the first one. It's making sure that human rights of people in what we call places of non-freedom. And these are not just prisons. It could be orphanages. It could be homes for the elderly. It could be other institutions where the people's opportunities are limited because of their presence in these institutions, but still their rights are granted and not challenged. The most recent one we started in 2014, and that was the response to the Maidan and the new organizations, initiatives, people's ideas, and also the new challenges which emerged in 2014. So we opened 4 smaller offices. It's really now a one-person presence in 4 places, which I think is extremely important, and I'm happy that 2 of them actually are the same, where you have your advisory centers. One is Kharkiv, another is Lviv, but then there are 2 others, one in Odessa and one in Dnipro. That was done to be able to be closer to the local civil society, respond to the initiatives which emerge. Many of them may not necessarily be NGOs, but they would do tremendous things, and we felt that we could support that. We could help them build platforms. We served as the first donor for many of those who will not have the capacity for all this quite complicated application processes and management processes and so on and so forth, but the results are just amazing, and I'm very happy that we could work broader, so we do not just sit in Kiev. It's about the empowerment of generation of new leader. It's about the horizontal, self-organized connections between different sectors. It's not just NGOs. We're very interested in connecting with academic institutions, with small and medium enterprises, with cultural institutions. All of them do create this fabric of civil society, care about. Building domestic resource base for civic participation. What we mean by that is partnering with the business community and also with the communities at large to help generate local resources for positive change. You heard, of course, of the word crowdfunding, which basically means if there is a great idea and an organization can fundraise for it and get support for it from all sorts of sources. For some ideas, for instance, we were supporting a local emergent museum, and they brought together something like over 1,500 people who supported that. So we are able to match this with the amount that they would collect. So this is not just for us to be able to support more projects. This is also an example of how people can contribute as well, even if they're in terms of like every contribution really counts. So we support the culture activism, and here we are so happy to see the new culture institutions and would like to see how they develop, because we see them as another very strong actor in building a vibrant civil society which continuously reinvents itself, and one of the values of it is that it is engaging. It's not boring thing somebody does somewhere just for a small group, which actually originated this idea. So really see this as an opportunity to reach out to broader circles in the society, and that would be absolutely great. And this is something which you might be interested in sharing with us. It's about engaging academics and other intellectuals and enhancing critical thinking, specifically important in times when, unfortunately, the critical thinking is still a skill which needs to be built, and I hope we can be partnering there as well. So the European integration, lots of things about quite specific activities, but if I name one of those of them, in which I hope most of you have benefited, you'll understand why we have been doing this for over 10 years. The one is called visa-free regime. So we started working on that in early 2000. I was on the first train which was crossing the border with Poland for the first time with no visas. It was a great, great feeling, and we feel that we've contributed to that. It's international dialogues between intellectual civic leaders, opinion makers. We would love to have more information about the possibilities to connect you and other people we work with within these regional networks of intellectuals, regional exchanges of academics. We did experiment at some time with fellowships, scholarships, internships, which sound very similar to what Zarina was mentioning earlier. I will be happy to talk more about this. So we have this component too. International advocacy, of course, bringing as many people as possible worldwide to hearing the voice of Ukraine, specifically of those people who suffered from the war in the Donbass and the occupation, the Crimea, and actually having the international community act upon it even stronger and till the time when Ukraine's sovereignty is fully restored. Public health, just an example here, those of you who have ever bought or have been buying medicine recently, you probably heard about the possibility to get some of the money back. If that's a prescription, it's a reimbursement scheme, and the other scheme is, it's a very easy application you can install on your mobile, and when you go to a pharmacy or you go see a doctor prescribes you something, you can immediately check whether this is actually good medicine, if it's registered in Ukraine, if it's really for something that the doctor says that it's going to be treating you. It's the whole system called WikiLeaky, and the application is called the Leaky Control. I'm happy to share that. Access to palliative care that's helping people to live and end their lives with dignity. It's support for creating ocean of local health care. And by the way, that's the same for education. Decentralization reform has brought lots of opportunities and lots of money and lots of responsibilities to the local level. So we are trying to work with local partners now to make sure that the communities actually benefit. And exposure and social economic costs of corruption, part of why we got involved, the whole in the first place in working with the Prozoro was access to medicines, to essential medicines, because the cost of corruption for some medicines was so huge that the medicines would cost several times higher than they would cost in the US, in the EU, elsewhere. So that was how we tried to respond to that. And advance the right to health in closed setting. Again, this is mostly about people who are now in detention. Their freedom can be restricted, or movement can be restricted, but obviously their rights and their health may not be restricted. Special program, and that's the only one where we still have individual fellowships. I have to say, we support NGOs, organizations. By our statute, we are made to do that. But Roma Education Fund, this is our long-standing partner within the Open Society Foundation's family, and the IRF had been supporting young kids from the Roma communities to go and get education in humanities and in law and come back and contribute to their communities to overcome those huge difficulties that the communities may be facing. That's our website. Check out more on what we do. There's lots of updates all the time. Open calls, which basically means you can send us a proposal. The competition is huge, I have to say. So we are an open donor. We do welcome proposals which come from you, but we also do have the strategy, so the proposal needs to be within the lines of what we actually do. The strategy is also on the website, and I outlined you briefly about what we are doing. Innovative proposals, it basically means this is not a call for proposal, there's no specific call, but there's such a great idea that we would want to discuss. Strategic grants. I mentioned access to legal aid, and we've been doing it for many years. Another one you probably all know, IRF was the organization where the whole system of external independent knowledge testing, known as ZNO, actually emerged. And the Minister of Education was actually managing the very, very, very beginning of the process, which then developed into the very successful and hugely important thing that the government owns. So that's kind of strategic grants. There are, they are not now the strategic grants, of course, of the ISF, but just to give you an idea of what it is. It's something we support many years because it's part of our essential strategic objectives, and they coincide with the partners' strategic objectives. And the foundation's own initiative, that's where there may be no NGO, or there may be no partner, or the issue may be difficult, and we would want to test it. So we go first. Like we were the first ones to start testing work in palliative care, where people somehow thought it's not good to discuss such sad things like death. Why would civil society bother about that? So that's an example. So if the issue is rather new, we would want to do it ourselves. How we can work together, and that's probably where I would wrap up. Connect, engage, contribute. Yeah. That's like a slogan I would like to leave you with. Let us know what you do. Let us know who you are. I really appreciate the book. I read it and got very inspired to see this community. Really would love to know more. And my colleagues at the foundation, with all those number of programs, I'm sure would like to meet you and hear more about your ideas, your work. There are maybe not necessarily things that we could do right now. For instance, we did have an experience of supporting a university, and that was the university, the Donetsk University in exile in Vinnytsia, and that was 2015, 2016. But we do not have the capacity to support a university now. But there are other models in which we collaborate. For instance, there is a very interesting opportunity. We support the think tanks, and one of the kind of think tanks which don't really, how do we say, it's not that they do not exist, but we would like to see them developing more. I'm thinking about think tanks within universities, living as part of the university system. We have now the partnership with the Kyiv Mohyla Academy, where we have 2 pilots for this kind of think tanks, one working on anti-corruption, one working on communication and international relations. One is ACREC, Anti-Corruption Research and Education Center, and another is the School of Political Analysis. And there is another one where we're experimenting with the Ukrainian Catholic University to build a think tank. Maybe you have ideas of how that would work. Would be happy to hear that. We would be happy to see you as partners in sharing the open society values. I think Zarina mentioned that as well. It's a great network, and we really would not want to just not be able to connect to you. Share your expertise. I mean it. We were talking a couple of days ago, and we were trying to identify challenges that we face when we support research. I'm talking mostly about policy research, not academic research, because that's, again, what's our mandate. And we realized that one of the challenges is actually not enough experts with solid education, with great ideas, with international language skills, with knowing how policy research actually operates. And that came at a great time when I learned about this network. So let's talk more about this. Expert subboards and groups. IRF is an interesting entity. All decision-making about grants is not done by administration. I am part of administration. Program people are part of administration. But we have the executive board, which is independent of the foundation, assembled of really prominent individuals who are not staff of the foundation. They're not being paid, but they decide on the strategy and on the strategic grants. And we also have the sub-boards, and I see Olena here. I think at some point we did collaborate with our expert boards before, and we need these inputs. We could actually think of how our expertise and our visions of the inputs that you could make could coincide. Peer reviewers and mentors, again, for our research, for our projects, for the papers that we support in different organizations and think tanks. Whoever's interested, let me know. Speakers at Open Society Talk, that's a track I first had capitalized, like open, big society and big talks. It's a program that it's not a program as a grant-making program, it's an activity. And it's a possibility to use public platforms to talk about things which are important for open society. And that's the whole range, from justice to inclusive education, from international politics to partnerships between intellectuals, from Roma issues to issues of migration, issues of dealing with the authoritarian past, international communication or elections, you name it. So basically, this is a kind of forum we would want to promote. We do not want it to be an IRF-driven forum. That's why I'm saying it's not a project. It's rather the space. We believe in common spaces where people would find conversations with like-minded individuals and just a space or place where they could come and express, as Ted says, it's inspired by Ted in a way, like ideas worth spreading. And let potential partners in the regions know what we do. we do work in the regions, but we would appreciate also being able to connect with your networks. This is what I picked from the book. The comment that struck me in one of the stories, was this: people with such education, such as yours, still have low influence on the destiny of our state. Unfortunately, intellect is underestimated here, but let's hope for the brighter future. Let's challenge this. Well, number one, I really, let me respectfully disagree. I think things are really changing rapidly, and there's a huge demand for intellect, for new ideas, for people who could put those ideas to practice, like you. Let's do that. Questions I will answer, and here's the contact details. Thank you. It's really a privilege to be able to talk to you.
Questions, please.
Hello, my name is Anya Bazilo. I'm an alumni of the Maastricht University, 2009-2011. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question, first of all, about the source of your, let's say, your donors, or are you self-funded as an OSF, or what are the other sources? And secondly, do you only give grants or, let's say, funding for registered NGOs or CSOs, or is it possible also to receive a grant for an individual, let's say, non-registered, or a group of individuals if we come up with a project? Thank you.
Thank you. Question one. We are a national foundation of the Open Society Foundations Network. Currently, up to 90% of the funding comes from the Open Society Foundations Network. We do have non-OSF funding. Part of it comes, it's a big program we have, it's a multi-year program called Think Tank Development Initiative. 90% of it is funded by the Swedish government. The government in Sweden. 10% is funded from the OSF. We're now in the second 4-year wave of that. We also have additional funding from the European Commission for a program called Civic Synergy. It works with two entities, two platforms. One is the Eastern Partnership Civil Society platform. It's over 200 NGOs from across Ukraine who work on different aspects of partnership with the European Union. Also, it was partners in countries of Eastern Partnership, which is Georgia, Moldova, to a lesser extent Armenia, so mostly it's Georgia and Moldova. Belarus and Armenia is now quickly catching up. And there is a second platform, which is part of our association agreement with the European Union. It's called Ukraine-EU Civil Society Platform. Again, it's over 100 entities. It's a huge number. So that's the other one is bigger. This is newer, a little bit smaller. There's overlapping membership. So that's where the non-OSF funding comes from. And again, it's like 90% comes from the EU. It's a little bit, 10% come from us. We cannot fund individuals. If you go on our website, which says what we do not fund, unfortunately, we do not give individual grants. And we do not fund on non-registered initiatives. I mentioned earlier that we worked a lot with emergent initiatives for whom we were the first donor. So you may say, how come? Partnerships with other organizations. There's always some organization already working somewhere, established NGO. In your case, there's a center. So basically, unfortunately, no grants to individuals, and it has to be a registered NGO.
Other questions?
Thank you. I have two questions. First, could you please elaborate on the priority about engaging academics and other intellectuals in enhancing critical thinking? What kind of projects can be supported here by your foundation? And second question about education. You mentioned that you can support teachers training, and I represent Ukrainian Catholic University, and last year we initiated a project about postgraduate training for secondary school teachers in history. So they came to our university and they exposed to new discussions, approaches, methodologies in academic history writing. Can such initiative be supported by a grant from you?
Thank you. Thank you. Let me start with the first one about the priority of supporting critical thinking and academic collaborations. This is part of our social capital component. It's a strategic priority for us indeed. It's new, relatively new. It's old new because we are coming back to where we worked a lot. It is about supporting partnerships between academic circles and civil society activists, because we see there's a lot to be learned between both sides. It's not that we want academics to become activists or we want all activists to get PhDs, but we do think there is a possibility to connect and work together, and joint projects could be done. Individual project or individual by just where the academic part is stronger are also possible. We are at an early time of understanding how we will re-engage with this and work with this. As of now, this is a component which is strong in our work with the think tanks, and also a component which we are hoping to develop further. And here, I think there is an opportunity for proposals as well in terms of strengthening critical thinking, strengthening the discussion of liberal ideas and dissemination of liberal ideas in times when illiberalism seems to be taking root in too many countries around the world, especially in Europe. We see that there is this role of academics. That's why we prioritize this part. On teachers' training, we do not train teachers. We work, and again, this is a new strategic component for us. We work with the ministry and also with the universities to put to bring in more of the social open society ideas into their curriculum making. So we cannot take a group of teachers and bring them to a university. And we believe this is something that the university needs to have the resources to do, and also the ministry, fortunately, is having some resources in the budget to be able to support this more. But we will be able, and we are hoping to be working more with the universities and with the ministry in making the teacher training adequate and effective for implementing the new reform strategy, especially the new Ukrainian school idea. There are lots of new competences that teachers need to have. So that's where we see our possibility to connect. And I hope we will not be alone there, because I know there are many others who also are trying to make an input in building capacity of teachers to be up to the standards and requirements that the new Ukrainian school in a broad sense wants them to be.
Hello, my name is Alina. I'm OSF scholar for the University of Cambridge. First of all, thank you so much for support which you're making for Ukraine. I know that you helped advance lots of reforms here. And my question relates to what's your view as a fund on the social entrepreneurship, meaning that the project is tackling the issue which is not really profitable, and it needs grant support to spread the idea, but it also might charge business or people some money. Do you support such kind of a project?
The short answer is yes. There is a history of our efforts with social enterprise. We started in 2009 with the anti-crisis humanitarian program. Remember the crisis of 2008, 2009, and part of the response we wanted to offer was support to social enterprise, so that the people would come, but they would work still as enterprise, not as an NGO which is doing some things which are more than an NGO would be doing. I have to say that was a difficult start, partly because the enterprise side was not as strong as we wanted it to be. We never gave up. We came back with or rather the partners came back to us in 2018 or 2014 when there was a lot of initiative coming from volunteers, coming from communities, coming from people who realized that they are responsible for making things happen, and there was a lot of engagement from businesses. These models actually proved to be interesting for the civil society partners. So when I mentioned here as one of strategic priority that we will be helping build the local resource base for activism and for civil society. And when I say civil society, I don't mean just NGOs. I also mean the broader community. That would involve the academics. That would involve we call it extended civil society, just for the want of a bigger phrase. Right tomorrow, there is a big capacity development forum. It's about 1,500 people, lots of organizations elsewhere. We are not organizing all of it, thank God. We have 3 small events, and one of those events is a discussion on impact investment, which is not exactly social enterprise. It's more than social enterprise, but there will be someone talking about what's the difference and how we make the change between supporting NGOs, which rely on a donor to a very heavy extent, supporting ideas, which is the fellowships, engaging with businesses, especially with innovators, with those who look for these places or opportunities to make an impact, and then just having social enterprise, i.e. people who would create a self-sustainable or at least partially self-sustainable entity which would feed those who are hungry, address local social needs, help take some of the services the state is not extremely efficient at providing. I'm thinking about caring for the elderly, providing nursery services, providing some services in education, so on and so forth, and having the social enterprise take care of that. So yes, we are very much interested, and we see this as one of very important contributions that a donor foundation, because we were made as a donor, could make, and that is building the solid financial resource base for many things that could live without a donor, ideally.
No more questions?
Not all questions need to come right now. I do hope, and I do mean, and I feel grateful to Andrei, Natalia, and to each and every one of you that we will be able to continue this conversation. You have our contact details. We are just a few streets away from here. Welcome. Thank you.